Hi, all. I wanted to share with you a decision I've made as far as a way that I can make the class reflect your strengths a little bit better. With this online class where we only have two tests, it makes each test seem so important. And they are important. And since there are just two tests, I can't remove any test grades. But I think that you'll like this compromise idea that I have to try to help some out. I had several students email me after taking their midterm that they were concerned that their midterm was so bad that they may not be able to do well in the class. That's not the case. I want to make sure that my classes always allow students to grow throughout the semester and improve upon their performance. That's hard to do with a class with only two tests, and that's not ideal. I would hate giving just two tests under normal circumstances. It's what was forced upon me due to this COVID. Pellissippi does not want us testing very often. So here's what I've done instead. Now on the policy sheet, if you go back and read it, it says that your test average is worth 50% of your final grade and that your remaining achieve homework grade is worth the remaining 50%. Very straightforward, simple policy. So I'm never ever going to go against what's on the syllabus, especially if it's not to your favor. But I am going to make changes that benefit you. And you'll see here in this scenario, there's no way that the old grading policy would have benefited anyone more than my new kind of policy. What I've decided to do is to count your higher test twice. Now, please do not confuse that with replacing the low grade with the higher grade and only counting the higher grade. No, I can't do that. But what I will do is count the higher grade as 2/3 of your test average. So the lower grade only counts 1/3 of your test average. In addition to that, what I'm also going to do is count your higher test, or sorry, your higher overall average, whether you did better on homework throughout the semester or if you did better on tests throughout the semester. I'm predicting that most people's homework average will be superior to their test average since you get infinite attempts at each homework question, and you can always view my video examples of very similar problems for every problem that you come to in the homework. So most people are going to have fairly near a 100 average as long as they put enough work into it, I would imagine. What I'll do is I'll count that as 2/3 of your final average, and your test average is only 1/3 of your final average. Now, for the rare student who has not done much of the online work, and maybe they're doing well on tests, I'll count their test average as 2/3 of their final average. You can see how that plays out in three examples here as follows. These are all of these examples are using the same data. Let's say the first student here has a 100 average on Achieve at the end of the semester. Their midterm test was a low 35, and they've improved on the final exam and made an 89 on the final test. Now, the way that that would be done according to the syllabus is I would just take an average of their two test grade. You can see that'd be a 62. And then I would take that 62, average it with their 100 on Achieve, and it would just leave them with an 81, which would be a C plus for the final grade. Now, if you take that exact same data, 100 on Achieve, 35 and 89 on the tests, you can see if I count that 89 twice, the test average, instead of being a 62, goes up to a 71. And then the overall average, if I factor the Achieve grade twice and the test grade once, then you can see that the overall grade goes up to a 90.3. So it would take a student in the C plus range and raise them up to the B plus range in this case. So that student who really struggled on the midterm, but ends up learning the information throughout the semester, there's still really good chance of them having a very solid grade in the class. Now, let's look at another example where they have a good grade on Achieve, and again, a 100. Let's say they did well in the midterm, but they struggled a bit on the final exam and just made a mediocre C on the final exam. So in the case where we were looking on the syllabus sheet, their test average would be an 85, and their overall average would be 100 plus 85 divided by 2 for a 92.5. That student would just barely move up to an A. So it's really in between a B plus and an A. If it were exactly 92.5, I would go ahead and raise it up to an A. But now that's very close on the borderline. Whereas that same student would extremely comfortably make an A under my new kinder policy here, where the same grades, I would factor the 94 midterm grade twice. So I don't care which of the test grades is higher, whether it's the midterm or the final exam. I will count whichever one is higher twice. So it's not just that I'll count your final test twice. I'll count either one twice, whichever one is higher. So in this case, their test average, instead of being an 85, it moved up to an 88 by counting the 94 twice. And the final average, instead of being a 92.5, you can see moved up to a 96. And in my last scenario here, this might be where a student who didn't really work as hard on Achieve as maybe they should have, and only had a 75 average on Achieve, but maybe they didn't work on it so hard because they felt that they knew the information pretty well anyway. And so they came in, they took my tests and did pretty solid work on the test, made an 80 on the midterm. And then on the final test, they made a 100. Under the policy sheet, their test average would just be the average of those two grades, which would be a 90, and their final score would be an average of that 90 with their Achieve grade, which would give you an 82.5. That'd be at the very tip top of the C plus range. I would barely raise it into the B range, barely, because it would round up to an 83. Now, that same student with a 75 on Achieve, 80 on 100 on the tests, under my new policy, I would count that 100 test on the final exam twice. You can see that they would have a 93.3 test average. And then I would take that 93.3 and count it twice for their final average, along with their Achieve score of 75 to get an 87.2 final average. Now, 87.2 would still barely be in the B range. It would need to be an 87.5 to move up to an A range. But that could easily be achieved by knocking the grade on Achieve from a 75 to a 76, or maybe raising one of these. Well, obviously the only one that could raise is the 80, maybe an 81 instead of an 80. It wouldn't take much to raise that 87.2B up to the 87.5, which would be the minimum required to move up to the B plus range. Okay, hopefully this makes sense, and hopefully it encourages some of you who are currently discouraged if you didn't do as well on the midterm as you would hope. Please remember, I'm always here to help. I want you to be successful in this class, but at the same time, you have to put forth the work. You have to come and see me on Zoom if you're struggling in the class. I can't help you unless you let me help you. All right, take care.